it's exciting stuff, all right. A celebration twice a year of big stars, fast cars, and, yes, the almost inevitable Talladega big one. Hi, everybody. I'm Dave Despain. My assignment this time, figure out how all this came about. Answer some questions. For example, how did the biggest, baddest, fastest racetrack in the world get built out here in rural Alabama at a place the locals call Talladega, and the rest of us have been mispronouncing now for more than 40 years? And this, how come opening weekend here turned into one of the most controversial races in NASCAR history? Promise you this, no matter how you say its name, the story of the birth of Talladega Superspeedway is fascinating stuff. Let's be clear, there are lots of different stories about the origins of what was originally known as Alabama International Motor Speedway and about the man who built it.
The primary site, and the site that was everyone expected he would build that big racetrack, was over near Raleigh.
He wanted to build Talladega north of Greenville, South Carolina. I don't care what anybody says, that's where he really wanted to do it.
All right, we have our first disagreement. Disagreement, the hallmark of the first racing weekend at this place. In fact, disagreement is what this whole show is about. But we can agree on this. The man at the center of this story, the stock car racing giant who put Talladega, Alabama on the map, is Big Bill France. You know the story. The sports patriarch raced on the old Daytona Beach course. He founded NASCAR in 1948 to bring order to the racing game. Then built his motorsports cathedral, its name synonymous with stock car racing, Daytona International Speedway, opened in 1959 with the first running of the Daytona 500. Considering that in '59, nearly 60% of NASCAR races were on dirt, Daytona was a revolutionary change. But Big Bill wasn't finished. He soon set about building an even more super speedway, Talladega.
The days of the dirt tracks were rapidly growing to a close. So he realized that, especially with TV coming on board too, more and more interest from the networks, that the races had to be spectacular. And that's where he felt, well, Daytona is up and running and working well. Let's just expand on this idea.
I think that was very important to build, to have the biggest and best racetrack in the world, and this sure was going to be it.
He wanted to outdo Daytona a little bit, so he made the turns a little bit wider and a little bit more steep, and he made the track just a little bit longer, just so the track would be a little bit faster, and to help put it on the map.
It's only 12 feet wider than Daytona and 1/10 of a mile longer, but it looked about 30 foot wider and look about 2 miles longer.
It was humongous. I thought Daytona was big, but then you look at that track, it looks like you could put Daytona inside it.
It could have been a big success story. Stock car impresario, expands his empire, builds the most super of super speedways, has a big opening day race, everybody goes home happy. But it didn't go down that way. No, indeed. Instead, I have for you a story of perseverance and politics, of union busting and driver outrage, of chances taken and opportunities lost. We're going to hear from the big stars who refused to race, from the little guy who won the race, and from the two guys who still insist, 40 years after the fact, hey, wait a minute, he didn't win, we did. Stick around. I think this is going to be fun. Welcome back. Building on the immediate success of Daytona International Speedway, Bill France Sr. set out in the 1960s to build the world's biggest and fastest racetrack in South Carolina.
South Carolina had a blue law at that time where you could not race on Sunday. That's why the Southern 500 used to be run on Labor Day. He tried to get the blue law lifted, but he couldn't get it done, so he headed elsewhere.
Elsewhere turned out to be here, Anniston, Alabama. We're about 20 miles from the actual track site. The selection of the location, well, let's see. The cast of characters in that story include the controversial governor of Alabama, the U.S. Department of Defense, and the guy who first sent the search in this direction, a colorful NASCAR race driver. Turns out Aniston owes a huge debt of gratitude to Fonty Flock, one of NASCAR's first champions. Old Fonty retired in the 50s and went to work for Bill France.
I got involved in it around 1965 through Fonty Flock. It was his idea to build a track in Alabama.
Fonty said that he knew a place in Aniston that would make a great place for a racetrack, but it was just a small piece of land that had one dirt road leading back to it.
Mr. France told me to find him 1,000 acres of land near an interstate, and he would look at it.
2 or 3 months later, Bill Ward called him and told him that you need to look at this airport over at Talladega. Said that'd make a good place.
That proposed site between Atlanta and Birmingham was within easy driving distance for thousands of fans.
There was no really big track in that area. Nashville wasn't far away, so they had potential to draw terrific crowds.
It's sitting out there in a little small town, but it's surrounded by all these people.
It was also in the middle of nowhere.
It was staggering, I guess, because it was so remote. After you leave the airport in Birmingham, there was a fruit stand between the airport and the racetrack, I guess, and that was about it. You know, maybe one service station.
That's one thing about a racetrack. You can build out in the middle of nowhere and people will come.
And those people bring tourist dollars, a fact not lost on the governor of Alabama. On the national stage, George Wallace was one of the most controversial figures of the turbulent 60s. Back home in Alabama, he knew a good thing for his constituents when he saw it.
They got Governor Wallace involved, and they made it financially possible for Daytona International Speedway Corporation to acquire the property on extremely favorable terms.
But the mutually beneficial relationship between Big Bill France and Governor Wallace required a bit of negotiation. Remember the criteria Bill France gave Bill Ward for his track site, 1,000 acres next to an interstate? This is I-20. It was built at the same time as the racetrack. The racetrack, which is conveniently located right about there. Here's the thing, you know how interstate highways work. To get the fans from here to right over there, Big Bill needed an exit.
He talked to Governor Wallace and told him, said, I need an 8-mile stretch of road connecting the exits from the interstate. Wallace told him, said, Bill, you build the track and I'll put a road in. And Bill looked at him and said, no, it doesn't work that way. You build a road and then I'll build a track.
As it turns out, Interstate 20 provided Bill France more than just a convenient way for his fans to get to the track. Once he had the site, once he had the financing, once the governor had conveniently built that 8-lane access road, it was time to find somebody to actually construct the facility. Bill found just the right guy out here building I-20.
Mayor of Talladega and one of the county commissioners said, well, we know the contractor that's doing the interstate out there, and they're a big contractor. They can they can build it for you. Basically, our contract was a one-page, 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper that, in essence, stated we would build the biggest and fastest racetrack in the world.
Next came a fascinating final negotiation. The hilly track site required a lot of expensive earth moving. The old World War II fighter base next door was already flat, and that got Big Bill thinking.
When the war was over, the United States government made a deal with Talladega to give them the airport and the land around it, but they had to agree to keep it up. Otherwise, the government could take it back.
Well, it turns out that airport was not maintained. It was in bad shape when the Vietnam War started, and the military needed to fly ammunition from the Anniston Army Depot to the West Coast. So France, faced with that giant earth-moving bill, solved everybody's problems.
He negotiated an arrangement with the city of Talladega to build him a new runway that could handle jets.
He'd build the airport to meet FAA standards and the military standards, And in turn, they would give him the airport and roughly 1,000 acres of land.
How's that for a win-win-win situation? France gets a nice piece of land, already flat, on which to build his track. Talladega saves space, keeps its airport, nicely refurbished, still in use today. And the military maintains the ability to fly those big cargo planes in and out of here without spending a dime. Don't you love it when a plan comes together? All right, stick around. It's time to actually build the fastest track in the world.
May 23rd, 1968, groundbreaking for the Alabama International Motor Speedway. Bill France kicking things off with a bang, literally.
He had aerial bombs planted in each of the 4 turns and one at the start-finish line. And he said, over here is the first turn, and kaboom, went an aerial bomb off in the distance. And then here's going to be the second turn, and kaboom, went another aerial bomb. And then you went to the 3rd turn and the 4th turn and then to the start-finish line. And you could really get a sense of how big this was going to be.
For certain, people were excited about this big track. However, none more so than the local racing hero. Bobby Allison lived down the road, Hueytown, Alabama. Bobby, an enthusiastic pilot, made good use of these runways that you can still see in the Talladega infield. They're a vivid reminder that this place was built on an old air base.
And I'd fly my little airplane over there and land on one of those stretches of the old runway and get out and watch them run the tractors and all this. In fact, I was pretty fond of Daytona, and now they were going to build one that was supposedly bigger and better and all the good stuff right there in my adopted home.
Constructing a super speedway required some innovative techniques from a guy accustomed to building highways.
The main challenges were modifying our equipment and setting it up to where we could make it work. And what we used were side boom tractors up on top of the banks, and we'd run a cable down and tie it to the rollers and to the paving machine.
Man, it looked like a tremendous pile of dirt out there as they began to build those banks and 4 stories high, and seeing the finished product is one thing. Seeing it in construction is eye-opening as to what it takes to put it together, to build it.
It changed every day, and it was like a living, breathing thing. And it grew like a child every day into this monstrous facility.
Actual construction took 16 months.
And you just had to have a vision to know what it was going to be. And to a novice, I couldn't fathom what it was going to be.
Money was tight. The track facilities, bare bones. 6 weeks before the first race, France told Moss, I need a press box and a couple of suites, and I don't have any more money.
We told him we'd do it at cost if he would allow us to build a suite of our own.
This is Bill Moss's suite. He still uses it every weekend. It's pretty deluxe. Although back on that first race weekend, the tables were plywood on sawhorses. There was no glass in the windows, and the VIPs had to wear earplugs. Never mind the cosmetics, though. The big thing, the track was finished and ready to race. And just as Bill France promised, this place was big.
It was just massive. I mean, you'd never seen anything like that big and wide, and you knew it was going to be fast, and it was just a huge thing, you know.
It blew my mind. First thing, I couldn't imagine anything that big. And I just couldn't, and that steep in the bank.
Bill France put me in the car and drove me around there at a fast speed, so I was very impressed with it.
Well, racer turned promoter Bill France was destined to make one more lap, a very famous lap on that opening weekend, and he did it to make a point in the midst of NASCAR's most dramatic confrontation ever with its drivers. Stick around, the controversial first race at Talladega is still ahead.
Bill Sr. told me if I was scared to go home. And when he said that to me, Leroy stepped from behind me and punched him in the face and knocked him down.
Formula One.
In the summer of 1969, Bill France's second superspeedway, bigger and faster than Daytona, was nearly complete. It was time to sell tickets for the first big race, and the big track provided the perfect sales pitch.
From my perspective, as someone who was charged with selling tickets at that event, it was all about when will we crack the 200-mile-an-hour barrier, which is what we said this track would support.
So when did the 200-mile-per-hour barrier fall? March 1970, 6 months after the first Talladega race. Buddy Baker wheeled his Dodge to a one-lap average of 200.447. So why didn't the cars go 200 on the track's opening weekend? There's a one-word answer to that question: tires.
The tire problem surfaced after practice began for the race. You know, we were there on about Wednesday of race week and went out and ran a few laps, and the tires began to come apart.
We put on new tires for qualifying. In 4 laps, I tore all 4 tires up. So it was a bad situation all the way around.
I think the tire engineers realized that this was kind of a different animal here. You know, they're getting into speeds that they had never traveled before. You had different, different stresses on the tires.
At Daytona, he had no problem because we'd run the car there a lot, but it was just the difference in the G-forces and downforce of the car at Talladega because of the speed he was running.
Back then, 2 tire companies, Goodyear and Firestone, confronted this new challenge, the highest speed stock cars had ever run, and they both had problems.
They'd been flying in different compounds every night, and they brought in this compound, ran 4 laps, and came in, and I couldn't believe it. The tires looked like strands of spaghetti smoking. It's pretty horrifying to think that a guy had been out there running on something like that.
When none of the engineering solutions worked and it became clear the tires simply could not survive at Talladega speed, Bill France got some bad news. Firestone pulled out.
We had a meeting and said, hey, we can't build a tire for this racetrack. It's too fast, and you got to remember, race drivers were dying in those days. These weren't a chance of going and hitting some soft wall and bouncing off of it and being sore the next day. These were people that were getting killed.
Given the risks, the drivers, those with the most to lose, faced some serious decisions.
We wanted to run in the worst way, but we didn't want to run under the circumstances that we was going to have to run under, from the safety standpoint of getting somebody hurt, somebody killed.
It's like Russian roulette, only you know that the bullet's in the chamber. Do you pull the trigger? And that's the feeling I had.
It was pretty tense. Little groups of people talking, and they would break up and reform, and groups talking here and groups talking there, and then of course the press people and chasing them around trying to hear what was going on. It was something different than I'd ever seen before.
So we had a little meeting over here, and they said, okay, let's just talk to France and say, give the tire companies, a week or 2 to come up with a solution on what their problem is, and we want to run here. It's not a deal we want to protest this thing. They're having a race and they're paying good money. We want to be there. But under the circumstances of the safety deal, we said we don't need to be here. And so all heck broke loose.
Oh, heck indeed, with fans and media flocking in, lured by the specter of 200-mile-per-hour racing, Bill France was not about to postpone Talladega's first big race. His financial future hung in the balance.
He had everything on the line. And people say, if that race hadn't happened, he probably would have been bankrupt.
He had gone terribly in debt building Talladega, and so International Speedway Company was right on the brinks of bankruptcy. And the worst thing you can do to an event is postpone it for any reason. It just knocks all the momentum out of it.
Now let's consider one more reason why Bill France resisted postponing that first race. You see, that idea didn't just come from the drivers. It came from a drivers' organization. That's a little different thing. A few weeks earlier, the Professional Drivers Association was created, and the PDA's idea was to increase the competitor's voice in NASCAR, to improve the racing conditions, and to lobby for benefits like insurance and pensions. Now that sounds just a little bit like a union, and NASCAR's attitude about unions was pretty clear. 8 years earlier, Curtis Turner tried to get the Teamsters to represent the drivers. Bill France, who called Turner the greatest race car driver I've ever seen, banned NASCAR's biggest star for 4 years. Now this new driver organization, PDA, had chosen as its president NASCAR's biggest star.
I was the only one sitting still, I guess, when everybody pointed at me. We were having some good years along there, and we were kind of the leader of the pack between me and Allison. It was just one of those deals that they felt like that we had more clout maybe than some of them about talking to NASCAR, talking to France.
The PDA role in that inaugural Talladega weekend has been debated ever since. There are those who believe the organization went to the race looking for a cause around which to rally the drivers, to show the PDA's strength, and that the new track's tire problem was the perfect issue.
Well, first of all, I had no idea there would be any kind of a safety issue, period. And so there was no way to associate the idea of, you know, we'll have this union to support us if there's a problem, because we had no idea there was going to be a problem.
The PDA was not ready, organized, or had their stuff in a row to be able to go and protest anything or ask for anything. And this was just a deal that all the drivers, I think even if it hadn't been a PDA, I think the drivers would have stood there neck to neck and said, we ain't going to do this. Our neck's out there on the road, and if you won't run, I won't run, he won't run, okay, we'll just say, okay, we're not going to do it.
Premeditated or not, the PDA's position that the race should be postponed was never going to fly with the man who built Talladega.
Bill didn't like anybody stepping on his toes or trying to, horn in on his baby, more or less. He was the kind of guy who could take the heat, and he would look you right in the eye and not flinch. Not too many people went up against Big Bill and walked away intact, if you will.
Still ahead, this test of wills comes to a head, and the eventual winner of the first Talladega 500 is stuck in the middle. PDA on one side, his boss on the other.
He told me that morning, he says, now, I'm not forcing you to do this, but he says, this car's going to be in the race. If you don't drive it, somebody else will. And then he walked away.
Welcome back to the Talladega Superspeedway. After all the hard work, financial investment, political wheeling and dealing that Bill France had to do just to get this place built, his opening race weekend was shaping up to be a disaster. Neither Firestone nor Goodyear could build a tire that could handle the high bank speed on this huge tri-oval. The drivers were arguing that the conditions were just too dangerous to race and the event should be postponed. Desperate times, calling for desperate measures.
Bill, being a racer at heart, he went out and he bought a brand new Ford from Holman & Moody, and he went out and turned 175-mile-an-hour laps at the age of 60. And then he came back and said, look, if an old man can drive around there at this speed, what's wrong with you guys?
Yeah, he went out there and run, I don't know, several laps at 150 mile an hour. Well, there wasn't no problem at 150 mile an hour. But when you're running 50 mile an hour faster than that, that's when the problem came in.
Whatever the speed, France's drive got the racers even more riled up than they already were. And it emphasized one of France's key points that the drivers simply would not accept.
Bill France said, well, you don't have to run 190 mile an hour. You can run 175. And we all talked about, you can't race 175 because somebody's going to run 180.
For the driver to say, well, I'm not going to run wide open, then he's not doing justice to himself, to his car owner, to the fan or anybody else.
Through all the debate and disagreement, one thing did not change. France's position that the race would run as scheduled.
He was an absolute block of granite. We're going to run this race on a scheduled date. If you don't want to run, go home. Somebody else will run.
Bill Sr. told him that we're going to have a race if it's nobody races but myself and my son.
He was not going to let the drivers dictate to him what he could do and what he couldn't do. He was just bound and determined that he was going to show the drivers up that, hey, we can't do this, we're going to do it, and come hell and high water, we're going to show you we can do it.
I think that he afraid he would lose control of everything. And you know, NASCAR is about control even today.
Let the record show in all the discussions, debates, and arguments throughout that contentious first weekend, France never publicly acknowledged the existence of the drivers' organization.
There were no discussions ever with the PDA. Because if we recognized the PDA for discussions, we recognized the PDA, and we refused to recognize the PDA in those days. So, and never did.
Race day drew nearer, the tensions mounted, the opposing voices grew steadily louder, and one of the most outspoken drivers was the late Leroy Yarborough.
Conversation that I will never, ever, ever forget. Big Bill and that deep bass voice of his, deeper than mine, said, Leroy, you're a pilot. When you take off in your plane and you encounter a storm, what do? You slow down and go around the storm. And Leroy Yarborough said, Bill, when there's a storm as bad as this damn racetrack, I don't even take off.
Perhaps inevitably, rising tensions eventually gave way to physical confrontation, at least according to the leader of the Alabama gang.
Bill Sr. told me if I was scared to go home. And when he said that to me, Leroy stepped from behind me and punched him in the face and knocked him down. And then Leroy said, come on, let's get out of here. And they began to load their cars immediately.
Yeah, I wasn't in on that deal. They told me about that. I don't know if anybody hit anybody, but I know there was a swing or two, okay?
More than fisticuffs, it was the top competitors actually putting their cars on the haulers that brought the crisis to a head.
I looked up just about sundown, and I saw the blue smoke roll out of that petty engineering truck, and I knew they were leaving.
Naturally, I had to be the first one out the gate, and then everybody followed along. We all went home.
Petty, Pearson, Yarborough, the whole bunch of, they're on their way out. They weren't just staging a sit-in or a holdout. They were serious, and they were leaving.
I got up and I could look out my window and I could see where they were coming out. And there were a string of them heading out for Highway 78, and they were gone, and so Plan B went into effect.
You know, it's no surprise to learn that France had a Plan B. He was a smart guy, former racer, understood how racers think. So as the situation around him deteriorated, he started to anticipate and plan for the worst-case scenario, a big race with no big stars. But what was Plan B? Stick around, we'll find out. Welcome back. You know, we've talked about all the pressure Bill France felt to get that first Talladega race run with all the tire problems. Well, think about the pressure on Chrysler Corporation. Dodge had been getting its butt kicked by Ford the whole '69 season. They came here with the wing car, the Charger Daytona, to turn that around in its debut race. The Dodge driver lineup was interesting. Car number 71 was driven by the late Bobby Isaac, a legitimate NASCAR star and independent thinker who refused to join the PDA and thus was not part of the walkout. At the wheel of the sister car, number 99, was a relative unknown who had a date with destiny. North Carolina Dodge driver Richard Brickhouse, who supplemented his racing income testing Firestone tires, had caught the eye of the Chrysler Corporation. He went to Talladega with the opportunity of a lifetime to drive one of those new winged factory Dodges. He'd also joined the PDA. Why?
Just being one of the boys, being one of the group. People that you're going to get out there and race with and trust your life with and whatever, you got to be halfway confident that you're one of them.
So when the PDA drivers threatened to go home, Brickhouse had to choose, be one of the boys or keep that factory ride. Ronnie Householder, the head guy at Dodge, put Richard's choice in simple terms.
He called me over there, and his car was sitting there, and he told me that morning, he says, I'm not forcing you to do this, but this car's going to be in the race. If you don't drive it, somebody else will. And then he walked away, and that's when I made my decision.
The decision? In a recorded message to the fans, Brickhouse resigned from the PDA to drive the factory Dodge. And the rest of the field, remember Bill France's plan B? He invited the drivers from Saturday's preliminary to race again on Sunday. Among those drivers, that local insurance man who first helped France find the site for the track.
So we ran our race Saturday, a 400-miler, and then Mr. France put all of our cars into the Sunday's race just to fill in to make a field of cars. And we was tickled to death to get the race again, you know, we was thrilled to death.
Certainly the Saturday drivers were thrilled to race on Sunday, but France still had to appease the fans who paid to see the heroes.
He did a magnanimous thing for the fans that came, and he said if you keep your ticket stub, it's good for any future race at Daytona, which he also ran, or here at Talladega.
You know, that defused a lot of hard feelings. We're going to get 2 for 1, and the next one would have been good for the Daytona 500 in February, which was and still is, you know, the granddaddy of all stock car races. And so they said, you know, it's not a bad deal.
So the big stars left, but France stood his ground, still has a field of cars. The fledgling Dodge star Brickhouse has made his decision, and the fans seem happy. All that's left is to run the race.
I was upset, yeah, and we were all upset, you know, because, I mean, we knew we won the race.
Welcome back. Bill France was fond of naming facilities within his speedways in honor of people who helped to get the places built. This is the OV Hill Grandstand. OV, a local mover and shaker, a France ally in the Talladega project. Down there, the James Hardwick Medical Center, named for the mayor of Talladega. For everybody involved in this project, at whatever level, the target date was September 14th, 1969, race day. Well, that day dawned very differently from what anybody had anticipated. But, as Bill France said all along, the race did go on. It was an odd sight, those 2 brand-new winged Dodges, which the fans had never seen before, easy to spot among a bunch of smaller pony cars and one AMC Javelin. No, it wasn't what anybody expected, but history recalls that first race ran the full 500 miles with no major tire problems.
I didn't run fast enough. I ran 140 miles an hour or something, those little cars, 150 maybe, but I ran the same set of tires Saturday and Sunday. I ran 900 miles on a set of tires.
The green flag is displayed, and the crowd on their feet. Real great race, you folks are not here. You're missing one of the best. It's Isaac down low, and Brickhouse up high, and Brickhouse moves ahead by about 2 car lengths, slingshotting into that turn. This Dodge Daytona is putting on a big show here at the Alabama International Motor Speedway.
But what about those big, fast Dodges capable of speeds that had created tire problems all week? Well, Isaac ran too fast early, did burn up the tires, eventually settled for 4th. Brickhouse played it the other way, not using his huge speed advantage, laying back, making a race of it.
Vandiver's in the lead. Richard Brickhouse cutting down on the inside now. It looks like, he drops back in behind him as they head down the short straight into the number 1 corner. The battle on from first place.
That's what I had to do to protect the tires and race car and be around at the end of the race. That's exactly what I did.
With Isaac out of contention, Brickhouse really had just one potential rival. Grand Touring driver Jim Vandiver had stepped into Bobby John's car when Bobby chose not to race. It was an old-style non-wing Dodge, but very fast. And as the laps wound down, those two took off to decide it between them.
Jim Vandiver on his proper. There goes Brickhouse alongside him, and he's taking that lead away from Vandiver. Vandiver and Brickhouse really battling it out.
They just absolutely, they had to be going 25, 30 miles an hour faster than they'd run previously the whole race.
Richard Brickhouse is really turning it on. Last time around, 195 miles an hour. Richard Brickhouse in the Dodge Daytona, and he is really pouring on the coal here. The checkered flag is cocked and ready. Richard Brickhouse from Rocky Ford, North Carolina, moving down through the west turn. The checkered flag is down, and your winner, Richard Brickhouse. Confetti going up from the crowd as Brickhouse takes the win.
An historic moment in NASCAR. But wait, we end this weekend of disagreement with a protest. To this day, Vandiver and his car owner are convinced Brickhouse was a lap down.
Jim Vandiver in the lead. Here's Richard Brickhouse getting around Jim Vandiver as he goes around. So that gives him advantage there. He's made up one of those laps, Ned. That should put him back in the same lap with the leaders, Bob.
I had a lot of people in my pits that helped me keep track of the cars that's on the racetrack. So I knew where mine was all the time. And it led for many, many laps. When you lead, and you lead at the end, you've won the race.
Brickhouse gets around with that slingshot. He leads the race with Jim Vandiver riding in the number 2 position.
I was leading the race, and Brickhouse was back in there somewhere, and he comes up and passes me. Well, I didn't try to block him. I know all that does is put him back in the same lap.
I could see Jim Vandiver ahead of me, and all I had to do was pass him, you know, just pick up a speed a little bit, which I did. That's what I did the last 11 laps.
I was upset, yeah. And we were all upset, you know, because, I mean, we knew we won the race. There's no doubt about it.
Jim, I don't want to hurt your ego, no, but I was just playing with him. I was just trying to make a race. I mean, it makes a good story for them, but it just didn't happen.
Let's face it, I won the race, no doubt about it. Everybody knows it.
Here's the thing. NASCAR Scoring said that the number 99, the Dodge of Brickhouse, won the race. NASCAR Scoring gets the final word in disputes like this. Once NASCAR decides who won, they are not likely to change their mind. When we come back, the aftermath of the first Talladega 500. Welcome back. As we reflect on that first Talladega 500 and think about all the disagreement and conflict and headbutting, we arrive at the inevitable final question. Who won? That list certainly begins with Richard Brickhouse, though Ray Fox and Jim Vandiver may still need some convincing. And the first Talladega race winner had big plans.
It was like I was a shoe-in for a factory ride the next year. It was like I couldn't move. In fact, after I won the race, I was so confident I went and traded my airplane for a 200-mile-an-hour airplane. Between Firestone and Chrysler, I was going to be on the move.
But Firestone never returned to NASCAR, and Chrysler soon left. In less than a year, Brickhouse was semi-retired. He says he felt no ill will from the Professional Drivers Association, but at the next race, he was spun out on the second lap. Photographer Pal Parker says a couple of PDA drivers told him before the race where to stand to get these shots. Draw your own conclusions. Still, Brickhouse has no regrets.
The best way to deal with the past is to forget the bad and remember the good and move on. And that's pretty much the way I feel about the racing. A lot of good memories.
But what about the bigger picture? In Bill France's showdown with the Professional Drivers Association, who won?
Well, Bill won. There's no question about it. He put on his race. The race fans accepted it, and we're on the outside looking in at the end of the deal. And that was the end of PDA. If PDA ever had a chance of surviving and do good, it was gone forever.
Instead of doing everything in the open, we might have been better if we'd said, okay, let's get 3 or 4 of our drivers, 3 or 4 NASCAR people, let's get in a room and try to figure this out. And we didn't do that, and that was my fault because I wasn't professional enough in what we was doing in order to do that.
There's never been another driver boycott. There's never been another attempt to form a union or a drivers association. And I doubt there ever will be.
Certainly that Talladega confrontation with the PDA confirmed the France family's uncontested authority over the sport. Still, one of Big Bill's stalwart supporters thinks the driver walkout took a heavy toll.
I think that it was a crushing blow to Bill France Sr. It's always been my opinion that this was the moment when Bill said, I am going to retire sometime soon.
Sure enough, less than 3 years later, France did retire, handing the NASCAR reins to his son, Bill Jr. Meantime, Big Bill's amazing Talladega Speedway remained the epicenter of stock car velocity. The peak, the spring of '87, when Bill Elliott sat on the pole at over 212 miles an hour. But in the race, Bobby Allison's car spun, lifted off, and flew into the catch fence, a sobering moment for all concerned. In the wake of Bobby's crash, NASCAR mandated restrictor plates for the superspeedway cars. We have not since seen a 200-mile-per-hour lap. And now my favorite footnote. We've talked the whole hour about the birth of a track. We'll leave you with the birth of a team. One of the Grand Touring drivers who helped France fill the field was a determined young racer named Richard Childress. Yes, that Richard Childress.
You know, I was driving a race car, just a young kid out trying to get a start, living a dream, and to be able to run our first Cup race back then, it was really a thrill.
More than just a thrill, that race was a Childress windfall.
That was one of the big breaks for me, is I brought that money back home and bought some land and built my first shop with it.
That's right. That first Talladega 500 gave birth to Richard Childress Racing. And we all know where that story goes. RCR eventually hired a rough-around-the-edges Milltown kid, Dale Earnhardt, who drove the iconic number 3 right into NASCAR's Hall of Fame. Childress and Earnhardt became Talladega's most successful team ever. With 10 trips to victory lane, Dale won more races in front of more fans than any other driver in the history of Big Bill France's big track. Significantly, the Intimidator won his very last race here, October 15th, 2000. You know what? That whole tale could make a great future edition of On Assignment. But for now, the hour is over and our work here is done. Each year, the Talladega Superspeedway adds a couple more chapters to its storied history, having already contributed more than its share of exciting and dramatic moments for the all-time NASCAR highlight reel. But it all began on that crazy September weekend back in 1969. I hope you've enjoyed our little recollection of the birth of the biggest, baddest speedway in the world. I'm Dave Despain. So long from Talladega.
When you think of Talladega, it's got to be speed.
Fast track. The biggest and the best.
At speed, when you're running 200 miles an hour, that thing looks like a one-way alley.
The track was so wide and so big, you could go anywhere you wanted to.
The show that is put on at Talladega is incredible.
Well, I think this great, big, beautiful facility in my home state of Alabama.
I'm very, very proud of it, and it's one of those things that I don't feel like I need to brag about it because it's sitting here bragging for me.
We ran a great race before a great crowd and launched a great speed.